Hello, everyone. I hope we had a nice break, got some fresh air, got some sunshine, and you're ready to get some learning in. Before I introduce our next speaker, I just want to make sure, well, I guess everyone who's coming to the Platform 2 talk, trickle in. Don't be afraid, find your seats. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone that you can go to slido.com, find the Platform 2, and with the hashtag CraftConf, you can contribute to any questions or give any feedback that you might want to give to the presentation. At the end, we'll go through some of the questions. And so without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Jason Lengstorf. He's going to talk to us about some great stuff. Applause.
Thanks.
Thanks.
I'm not going to lie, I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to deliver on that promise. This might just be some okay stuff. So, I'm a big fan of telling stories, and so the way that I like to do this presentation is by telling you a story. And like most stories that I tell, it revolves around my beard. And I am particularly proud of my beard. I like to say that I have the best beard in the room, but every time that I try to make that joke, somebody's got a better beard. Today it's one of the sound people, so that's great. But it is still a pretty good beard. And I want to apologize to you because due to my own bad habits and my poor treatment of myself, I very nearly robbed the world of the majesty. What the hell did I just do? Jesus Christ. What, okay, I'm just going to give up on that. Maybe. Is it going to work? Hello? Please excuse the technical difficulties. Is this going to work for me? Okay, well, all right. So let's go ahead and derail this flow of the talk. It's okay, though. So I nearly robbed the world of the majesty of my beard. And I'm going to show you a photo, and before I show you this photo, I just want you to understand that I do this with much personal chagrin. This is a photo of me. And I'm sorry that you have to look at it, but I want to make something abundantly clear. This was not a choice. I did not choose to cut a mustache onto my face. And so I was a workaholic. This was a huge problem for me and something that I struggled with really intensely. It was really common for me in the year 2012 to work for over 70 hours a week. And in fact, it was not all that unusual for me to be working 90 or more. This was a kind of a rough period in my life, and the way that my life worked at this point is that I was more or less attached to my phone. I would wake up, check email on my phone. I would more or less carry that phone around with me, checking email, checking chat, looking at different things that I needed to deal with for the day. I would carry it with me to the shower, set it down outside the shower, pick it up on the way out. I would walk to coffee. I would only stop looking at it long enough to make my order. Wouldn't even make eye contact. Then I would look at it as I walked home with that coffee. This continued until I eventually fell asleep by dropping that phone on my face in bed. This is not it wasn't great. But the problem here is that I knew this was unhealthy, but these long hours were a sort of perverse pride for me. I felt like I was hustling harder than anyone else. I was the hardest worker that I knew. I put in the longest hours. I wanted it the most. And I used that as kind of a badge of pride, like, oh yeah, man, I only got 3 hours of sleep last night. I'm grinding so hard. I'm the best. I'm the best at this entrepreneurship thing. And this all kind of would have continued unchecked, most likely, but I ended up landing a big project on something called Black Friday. For those of you who aren't familiar with Black Friday, it's an American holiday dedicated to the god of shopping, where we tend to dedicate most of our holiday shopping hours by skipping a family holiday to go wait in line. I landed a huge project. It was going to be with a Fortune 500 company. I'm under an NDA, so I can't tell you who it was, but I guarantee you've heard of them. And because this company is a Fortune 500 company, the way this worked is that they weren't actually ready to start the project until about 6 weeks before Black Friday, which meant I got to charge agency rates and rush fees. This was great. It's very exciting to be able to charge 2.5 times a agency rate, because that's basically, it's a stupid amount of money, which I was extremely excited about, right? So I was raring to go on this project. So we sat down and we made a plan. We decided we had about 6 weeks, so we were going to put 2 weeks into design, 2 weeks into development, and about 2 weeks where we would be able to do quality assurance, run the testing, make sure that everything was good to go before this actually went live. And of course, reality set in, and what ultimately ended up happening was I got handed a finalized design the Friday before Black Friday. And the deadline doesn't change. When you have a holiday launch, there's no pushing back the deadline. You either hit that deadline or you got to wait till next year, and that means you failed, right? But I'm no quitter. I knew I could pull it off. And so I did what I assume no one else in their right mind would do, which is I lived at my computer. I probably worked easily 100 hours, if not more. And I spent the entire week eating nothing but fast food. I'd sleep 3 hours a night. I wouldn't really leave my desk at all. I didn't leave my house at all. It was kind of a disaster from a personal self-care standpoint. And so the business result here was ultimately I shipped it, right? I hit that deadline. I worked my ass off. I stayed up late. I ground hard. I was on my grind, whatever we want to call that. And the project went live, right? The client loved it. They were super happy with the end result. They called me a rock star, a superhero, whatever you want to call the person who, shit's a miracle. And then the project made a bunch of money for the client. I made a bunch of money, which was super exciting. And for the first time in my career, I won an award for work that I'd done. Now, of course, this was subcontracted to an agency, so they won the award, and I'm not allowed to tell you what it was. But tomato, tomato, I still won that award. But there was still a personal cost, right? And the personal cost is steep with something like this, because I ended up missing Thanksgiving with my family. I worked right through it. I just called them. I said, hey, I got a big project. I'm not going to make it. I'm really sorry. Love you. Bye. And that was about the extent of my interactions with my family over the Thanksgiving holiday that year. And for the non-Americans in the room, Thanksgiving is one of the two biggest holidays, at least in my family. And it's the most family-centered one for my family. So this was basically me telling my family I cared a lot more about my job than I cared about them. I slept less than 4 hours a night. Now, for those of you who traveled from different continents, especially the Americans in the room, I imagine you're all feeling that pain right about now. I know I am. But sleeping 4 hours a night for a full week, it took a serious toll. I looked like I'd been punched in both eyes. I wasn't forming sentences well. I was in really bad shape. I ate fast food delivery for every single meal. I mentioned that already. I probably gained 10 to 15 pounds just that week. It was a really rough week. I felt terrible. I feel like I shouldn't eat fast food ever, but eating it for 2 to 3 meals a day for an entire week, I basically felt like somebody had just wadded me up into a ball of Play-Doh and thrown me against a wall. That was about how good I felt. And then the most important thing is that my beard fell out. And so, let me say that again, because I feel like I went a little bit fast. My beard fell out of my face. So, this is the only photo that exists of my bald patch. I'm sorry that I don't have a better one, because I destroyed the rest. But this is a photo of about 3 to 4 months after Black Friday. I was at a conference, and shortly before this, my partner at the time asked me in the morning, she said, did you cut yourself shaving? And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, there's a patch missing. And so, like I said, I care a lot about my beard, so I sprinted to the bathroom and I checked in the mirror, and sure enough, there was this patch about the size of a small coin that had gone baby fine and turned white. And over the course of the next few months, it fell out and it expanded. And then another one started on the other side. And inside of about 6 months, the entire bottom of my chin had stopped growing hair, just entirely. So all along here, there was no hair. I had effectively given myself something called stress-induced alopecia, which the doctors don't agree is a real thing, but anecdotally, I know it's a real thing. So at this point in my career, like I said, I was working 70 to 90-hour weeks fairly regularly. This was not a new experience for me. I was already starting to burn out. But to be completely honest, when my beard fell out, this was it for me. I realized that something needed to change. It was time for a really severe re-examination of my priorities. So I made a decision that I would prefer to be poor and healthy than successful and sick. Unfortunately, this was not an easy decision for me because I placed a lot of value on myself as a person. I drew a lot of my value as a human being from how successful I perceived myself to be as an entrepreneur. My agency that I ran and Jason the human were not really separate entities in my mind. If the business failed, I was a failure. And if I succeeded but the business didn't, I wasn't succeeding. It was just me shirking my duties of taking care of the other half of my life. So this was a big problem for me. I decided I was going to try something radical, and ultimately, because I decided that being poor and healthy was being better than successful and sick, I decided that I was going to basically throw a hand grenade into my career and be okay with the aftermath when things went horribly wrong. So I only accepted calls during business hours. My phone started I just didn't take calls after 6 p.m. or before 8 a.m. I turned off every single notification on my phone. It did not beep ever. It was just silent. I turned on Do Not Disturb mode so that my phone couldn't receive phone calls between 6 and 8 a.m. I only checked my email twice a day, which was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. And I set up activities with my friends. I would go out, I would make plans. And when I showed up to those plans, I would not take my phone with me. I made it impossible to distract me from the activity that I had committed to partaking in. And so I really decided that I would rather lose some of my clients. I would rather damage my business if it meant that I could be a happy person. I wanted to have a life that, when I look back on it, involved more than work. Because the lifestyle of 70 to 90 hours a week, it doesn't leave a lot of time to be social. It doesn't leave a lot of time for nurturing relationships. It typically means that I would be at dinner with my partner, an email would come in, and I would stand up and leave so that I could deal with whatever had happened, leaving her sitting clearly fuming with me because I was prioritizing everything over, or I was prioritizing work over everything. But that wasn't what happened. I thought that my business would explode when I took these drastic measures. So I was expecting that my clients were going to leave. They were going to say, hey, you're super hard to get a hold of. We're not happy with the level of availability. We're going to go somewhere else. I expected that people were going to try to get a hold of me with new opportunities. Some client would want me to build something, and I wouldn't get back to them in time, and so they'd go with somebody else. And I expected that I was going to accomplish less. I mean, obviously, if I'm not working 70 hours a week, there's no way that I can do as much work as I was doing by working 70 hours a week. But what actually happened, and this is where I started to get really curious, no one noticed. Not a single client emailed me and said, hey, you're hard to get a hold of. My business grew. I started adding clients to my roster, and my reputation improved, actually. And I started getting more done. And at this point, you might be asking yourself, how is it possible that I got more done by working fewer hours? And I was asking myself the same question. So I'm going to answer that, but before I answer that, I'm going to nerd out for a little bit. So let's start by talking about some science. The first thing that I want to talk about is that working 60 plus hours a week actually has been proven to make us less productive than working a standard 40-hour week. This is a study that was done back in the days of early production. Henry Ford did this with his assembly lines. I think the traditional working day was to work 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. And obviously, this is very stressful for somebody who's doing manual labor. Like if I think it's hard for me to sit behind a computer on my ass all day for 70 hours a week, I can't imagine what it must have been like to actually do labor for 60 hours a week. And so he wanted to figure out what's the maximum amount of production we can get for the minimum amount of cost, which, it's capitalism, right? It's profit motive. He wanted to pay people for the least amount of hours to get the maximum amount of production. So he started testing. And what he found was that after 40 hours, people would start to get exhausted. If you consistently work more than 60 hours, your exhaustion rate goes up. When your exhaustion rate goes up, your error rate goes up because you're tired, you're making mistakes. And after a certain threshold, which is not very long, it's anywhere from like a couple weeks to 2 months, your error rate goes up sufficiently high that you're making mistakes that take up more than the 20 hours of extra time that you're working, which means you're getting less done. You're doing negative work because you're causing so many problems that you then have to spend time fixing. If you were just working 40 hours a week, you would not make those errors and you would be accomplishing more overall. And for anybody who wants to fact check me, I've cited all of the research at the back of this presentation, which is available online at get.io/work-life-balance. I'll also tweet it afterwards, so watch the conference hashtag. Long hours also destroy passion and engagement. I know that you don't technically need a research study to prove this, but the research study has been done, and so I'm citing it. If you work for long hours, if you have uninterrupted periods of basically all you ever do is work, it's extremely hard to be passionate about the thing you're doing. You spend your entire life doing one thing, and I don't care if that thing is like getting in a pile of puppies. Eventually, you're going to be like, puppies kind of suck. And that's a ridiculous thing to say, but seriously, try laying in a pile of puppies for 70 hours a week. Eventually, you're going to come up with some complaints. So it doesn't matter if you've got the best job in the world. Things will eventually, it just drains the passion if that's all you've got. They say distance makes the heart grow fonder, and that's true of everything. It's not just true of romantic relationships. You need some time away from the things that you love or that you're passionate about so that you can remember why you're passionate about them. If you never miss coding, if you never miss doing a design or working on a project, you're never going to go, what I'd really rather be doing right now is working on that project. And you miss that chance to remind yourself that it's important to you. Overworking, if you're working at a big company and that company is fond of crunch time or a less flattering death march where they put you on short deadlines and mandatory overtime, it actually has an extraordinarily high impact on employee turnover. And if you're looking at this from if you're looking at this as an employer, it may be tempting to say, oh, well, we have salaried employees. We pay them for 40 hours a week. So if we get 60 hours a week, we're actually getting 150% of our investment. However, here's where this breaks down. It costs roughly 2 times more to replace an employee than to keep one for a long time. And so if you are driving people into the ground, destroying their passion and engagement, they want to leave, they go somewhere else, you then have to pay double their original salary, plus making market adjustments because everybody gets more expensive over time. You're now paying significantly more than if you had just kept that employee happy for a longer period of time. Creativity starts to fall apart if we don't take time to go outside and be people. Being disconnected from your work in a real, meaningful way is one of the best ways that we start to make connections between things. We are creative because as humans, we have the ability for abstract thought. We can look at something over here and draw an imaginary line that connects it to something over here. But if we spend all of our time over here, we never see the things over here to draw the lines between. We need the ability to go out and have different experiences to help us broaden our perspective, to help us see things that are different from what we do every day. If your vision is too narrow, it's almost impossible to be creative because the act of creativity is not actually creation. Creativity is connecting the dots between ideas that already exist. That's why you'll see everybody who's invented things over time, they're always saying that the act of creation is really just stealing ideas from other people and assembling them in a new way. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind because, again, if all you do is look at one narrow view of the world, one small scope of problems, you don't get the opportunity to see other ways that you could connect the dots to come up with better solutions. A lack of downtime is just brutal for productivity and creativity in general. Who here has ever had a brilliant thought while on a walk or in the shower? Right, that's a lot of hands. The reason that that happens is that when you disengage, when you have downtime, what we would typically call wasted time or boredom, what happens is our subconscious mind kicks in. And our subconscious mind is significantly better than we are at that abstract thought that I was just talking about. When your abstract mind or your subconscious mind has a chance to engage, it starts organizing ideas and finding correlations that we would not have found on our own. We need that time. That's where our creativity is coming from. That's why a lot of times if you're working on a problem really hard, you'll start dreaming about it. I know that a lot of times I'll start dreaming about code, or if I get a new phone game, like I'm playing Tetris, I'll start dreaming about Tetris. That's my mind working through the patterns and solutions that I've already got. When I dream about code, sometimes I'll wake up and I'll write down that code and it doesn't work at all, but it's okay because that's my mind thinking through these problems. This is probably the biggest one. We lose 20% of our time per task when we start multitasking. I'm going to come back to multitasking like 4 times because I hate it so much. So just look at that stat, weep a little bit, and we'll come back to it in a minute. Sleeping less than 7 hours a night is worse than being too drunk to drive. So in the United States, if you have more than 0.08% alcohol in your blood, that would be you'd go to jail for that. You'd get a driving under the influence. They did a test where they took medical interns and they would have those medical interns, one group got drunk, one group stayed awake. And what they found was, as the interns were getting more and more sleepy, they were actually performing worse on cognitive tasks across the board. Problem solving, hand-eye coordination, the ability to solve puzzles, all of that declined at a rate that was as bad or worse than the people who were too drunk to drive, or who were drunk. And this is super concerning, because if you think about it, 7 hours of sleep a night, that means if you wake up at, let's say, 8 a.m., and you go to bed at 1 a.m., that doesn't seem like a crazy amount of being awake, right? If you go to bed at 2 a.m. and wake up at 8 a.m., you're actually now cognitively impairing yourself in a pretty severe way. So a lot of times we have this backward. We will look at our employees or our coworkers, and if one of them comes in and says, "Oh man, I had such a long night last night, I worked 4 hours, or I only slept 4 hours because I was up solving this problem," we shouldn't be rewarding them with a high five, you know? Because if somebody came to work and they had 4 beers, we would just fire them on the spot, right? Like, "Hey, man, I'm ready for work, I had 4 beers." It'd be like, "All right, get out, you're done." But if they came in like, "Oh, I only had 4 hours of sleep," we're like, "High five, you're a hard worker." But really, we should probably reverse that. So at this point, I definitely have not answered the question. So specifically, how was I able to get more done by working fewer hours? Let me go into, I've got 5 specific things that happened that I'll try to detail here in the next 15 minutes or so. So this is where we start getting into the tactical part. These are the things that I hope you will take one or more of these things and implement it today, because each one of these things is possible to implement right now. But don't do it during the talk, like right after the talk. So the first thing is to track your time. I'm going to go through these quickly and then dive into each one in detail. The second one is to time box your tasks. Put actual temporal constraints on them. You want to front load your important work. You want to prioritize aggressively. And you want to stop multitasking. Just do not multitask. So let's go into the first one. The first thing that we want to do is tracking your time. There is a company that they specialize in weight loss. And if any of you have ever gone to a dietitian, or if you've read articles on how to lose weight, this is maybe a more American story than oh well, stick with me here. So if you're trying to lose weight, what a lot of dietitians will tell you to do is they will tell you to just keep a food log, and they don't tell you to change anything. You know, it's when I was working with Precision Nutrition, their food log was, for the next couple of weeks, just write down everything that you eat. No, don't change it. Don't make choices. Don't not eat the cheeseburger. Just write it down. And what you'll find is that when you are having to acknowledge what you're doing, when you have to consciously decide to not only do something, but to then record that you've done that thing, you tend to make better decisions. Because I may absent-mindedly sit in my house and eat an entire bag of chips, but if I have to write down, ate an entire bag of chips, I'm going to think twice before I actually do it. And so maybe I'll say ate a handful of chips. And now, just by acknowledging where my calories are coming from, I will make a better decision. And this is equally true of pretty much anything. If you want to make yourself better at doing literally anything, just acknowledge consciously how you're doing it. Keep a record of what's going on. Now, for somebody who's working 70 hours a week, tracking your time, that's not where you want to, like, that's just more shit you have to do, and that sounds terrible. So what I'll do is I'll use this app called Rescue Time. And Rescue Time sits in the tray of my Mac. It also works on Android. I believe it works on Windows. And it just tells me what I spent my time on every day. It gives me a report of all of the hours that I spent, what app I was using when I spent them. And at the end of the week, it sends me an email that says, here's where your time went. So I don't have to do anything. I install it once, and then I just let it go. And then I get a report at the end. And while this doesn't help me in the moment, I mean, I can check it daily if I want to see how much time I've spent. But what I find that it's really useful for is I look back and I say, okay, so on Friday, I worked 9 hours. That's more hours than I actually want to work in a given day. So maybe on Sunday, I don't open my computer at all. I have no time logged whatsoever. And that helps me, know that I'm working more or less than I should be, and it lets me balance out that time. Second strategy is to time box your tasks. The joke I always make about this is that if you really want to time box your tasks, go to a coffee shop and don't bring your charger, and give yourself a to-do list. Because you will never be more productive than when you've got 13% left on your battery. Oh God, I've got 20 minutes, I gotta get this done. So the goal behind this is to start looking at the way that you work, because this is gonna be different for everyone. Personally, I like to work in blocks of about 90 minutes. And if I work in shorter blocks, I feel like I never got into a rhythm. If I work in longer blocks, I have issues with kind of coming out of it. I'll talk about it more in a minute. Other people, they prefer the Pomodoro technique, which is about 25-minute bursts. My partner likes to do 60 minutes. My friend Nate likes to do 45 minutes. Everybody's going to have their own rhythm of how much attention you have before you start to get jumpy or you start to get overtired when you're working in a focused way. So the thing that I would recommend is decide how long you want to focus for. And then once you've decided how long you want to focus, you're going to close and turn off everything that's unrelated. Close the apps, turn off actually quit Slack, close the email tab, turn your phone on do not disturb mode, all that stuff. Start a timer. Once you've started that timer, do the brilliant thing that's on your to-do list, like do something great. When the timer goes off, take a break, and I'll talk more about why that's important in a second. And then you just do it again, right? And so what I've found with this is, for me, because I work 90-minute blocks, if I do 4 of these a day, that's 6 hours of work, okay? 6 hours of work is not an 8-hour day. But if I do 6 of these, I promise you I will get more done than I ever got done when I was trying to crank out 12-hour days without breaks, without time structuring or time boxing. And there are a few reasons that this works. The first one is that we're not distracted at all. Because we're turning off all the unrelated tasks, we're putting our phone in airplane mode and closing down chat, we have the ability to get a completely undistracted chance that we create space around ourselves to focus on a problem. And you can also do this if you have a hard time focusing in certain spaces. Find a place that's like your focus closet. I don't know. Like, you can go to a co-working space. Maybe it's a coffee shop. Whatever you find that's easier for you to focus in, because again, that's different for everybody. I like background noise at like a coffee shop. Other people need dead silence. Other people want music. Whatever works for you. But find that space and make sure that you're not distracted. And then by not being distracted, by working in a space that lets you really put your attention on the task at hand, you can get into what's called a flow state. Flow is a concept that is, I believe, named by someone named Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, which is a name that I've just murdered, and I apologize. But he has written extensively about this. And the general idea of flow, it's the feeling of being in the zone. Your work is challenging enough that you can get engrossed in it, but not so challenging that it's frustrating. You're able to devote your full attention to it. You tend to have a loss of time. So if you've worked on a task and felt like you did it for 10 minutes, but it's been 3 hours, that's a flow state, right? We want to encourage getting into that flow state. And by removing distractions and giving yourself that space, it's easier to get into that flow state. We're also taking breaks. So one of the downsides of a flow state is if left unchecked, you might sit there for 6 hours. I've definitely been guilty of this, where I'll start working at 8 a.m. and I won't notice that I haven't eaten, and I'll stop working at 3 and be like, oh God, I'm really hungry. The other thing that's really important about this is you're still available, right? When you are still available, you don't have to be constantly connected to your email. One of the biggest concerns people have when I talk about this idea of closing off and being undistracted is they go, well, what if my team needs me? Well, if you're working for somewhere between 60 and 90 minutes and you're unavailable, that's not an incredibly long period of time. You should be able to get everybody on your team lined out with tasks, like if you're a team lead or a manager, line people out with an hour and a half's worth of work, and then go do your work. And then in an hour and a half, you take your break, you come back, you check chat. How's everybody doing? You got what you need? Okay, you're done, let's get you a new task, right? If you're not a team lead, then you just tell your team, like, I'm about to do this thing, anybody need me right now? If nobody says anything, great, I'll see you in 90 minutes. It's not, it feels significantly worse to you than anyone else will feel. Being gone for 90 minutes it's nothing. And there's also something called science, and okay, so I asterisk this because I don't think it's actual science. I think this is kind of like hand-wavy science, but when we sleep, we have what's called a circadian rhythm. It's what regulates our REM cycles. It goes in about a 90-minute burst, more or less, and it's how we get restful sleep, which is why people tell you should sleep for multiples of 90 minutes. And if you haven't heard that, you should sleep for multiples of 90 minutes. But during the day, we have similar workflows. It's why we have energy spikes and dips throughout the day. We feel tired in the afternoon, and then we get a second wind in the evening. Those are our rhythms. And so if you are using those rhythms to follow your work, you work when you have an energy spike, and then you take a break when it troughs out, then you do another work block as your next wave comes in, and then you take a break when it troughs out. We're taking advantage of just kind of the natural ebb and flow of our energy throughout the day. This is really I just wanted to put this into my presentation because I like ultradian as a name for things. So the third strategy here is to front load your important work. I have a client, or a former client, who is a high school football coach, and he's full of all these great dadisms. One of my favorites is he says, if you gotta eat a plate full of frogs, you should eat the biggest frog first. And aside from being gross, that is actually really helpful advice. Because basically, what I've found, and this is borne out through my consulting clients, through my team, and everybody in my personal life, when we wake up in the morning, or when we start our day, we have a higher reserve of willpower and the ability to start and stick to a task. As the day continues, those resources deplete, which makes it harder for us to get things done. We tend to procrastinate. We tend to make excuses for why maybe we'll wait until tomorrow. We tend to be the best version of ourselves early in the day. We have more energy, we have higher focus, and our self-control is at its peak. And because of that, we should take advantage of it and do whatever the most important thing on our list. We should do that first. If we wake up and we waste our most productive hours of the morning checking email and chatting on Slack, by the time the afternoon rolls around, this is how people end up working at 9, 10 p.m. to avoid, they're like, oh, well, that's when everything quiets down and I can do real work. Well, it's also quiet in the morning. Do the work first thing and then show up on chat. And again, if you're only doing this for 90-minute blocks, it's not hard to do this without feeling like you're invisible to your team or unavailable. Because, again, when you're in the morning, when I get up in the morning, I am raring to go. So I get up, I'll usually wake up around 7 a.m., I'll go for a little walk, I'll get some coffee, walk back with my coffee, and then I sit down and I do something that's important to me. And that could be anything. It could be developing something, it could be writing a letter to somebody that I've been meaning to write a letter to, it could be literally anything that I've considered important. But I do it first because I know if I wait until the afternoon, I'm not gonna wanna do it, because by the afternoon, I start to look a little more like this. And this is a really, And even this is maybe more than I can handle by the afternoon. The fourth strategy is to prioritize aggressively. One of my favorite quotes, and I forget who originally came up with this, is that if everything is the most important thing, then literally nothing is important. If you prioritize everything at priority 1, then everything is at the same level of priority, which means there is no priority. And something that I may be apocryphal, but that I love as a story, is that the word priority didn't have a plural form in English until the 80s when a management consultant made it up so they could jam more shit onto people's to-do lists. My friend Nate and I have talked a lot about productivity, and we came up with something called the Highlander technique. For those of you who haven't seen Highlander, it's a really campy 80s movie where people with swords run around and try to cut off each other's heads. And the kind of the tagline or the slogan for the movie is that there can be only one, because apparently the last Highlander gets a prize or something. I don't know. I don't know if I got to the end of the movie. But what this means for me, from a task management perspective, is I'll write my to-do list like I normally would, my list of 8 things. But then on that list of 8 things, I'll draw a tournament bracket. And then I look at the items in the first 2 slots, task 1 and task 2, and I'll ask myself, of these 2 tasks, which one, if I ignore it, is more likely to get me fired? And then, whichever one that is, I move to the next bracket. And I continue until I've gone through the first round, and I repeat, and ultimately I end up with the one single thing that is most likely to cause a lot of heartache for me if I don't get it done. And that is the first thing that I'm going to work on. And it's the only thing I'm going to work on until it's finished. And this moves into the last strategy, which is the one that I care the most about, and it's the one that I'm going to yell at you the most about. And I apologize in advance for yelling, because you all seem like lovely people. But just stop multitasking. Please stop multitasking. And I'm going to tell you why in as many ways as I can. The first one is this graph, which makes me cry every time I see it. But this is the context switching cost of doing multiple tasks at once. So in the first column, you can see you've got one task, and 100% of your time is dedicated to that one task. When you get to 2 tasks, now you've got 40% of your time dedicated to each task, but you're also losing 20% to context switching, because the effort required to move from this task, which requires remembering what you're working on, setting up the mental context, building a mental model of the problem at hand, and then starting to execute on that, that costs you 20% of your time for switching. By the time you get to 5 tasks, you may as well not be working. You should just go home and leave a mannequin at your desk, because you're not getting anything done. And if you want to, so I've had people argue with me on this, and if you want to prove this out, if you want to demonstrate that this is in fact true for you, I'll give you a challenge. Take a piece of paper, and on it draw 3 columns. In the first column, you're going to write out the letters A through J, the first 10 letters of the alphabet, the English alphabet. In the second column, you're going to write out the numbers 0 through 9. And in the third column, you're going to write out the Roman numerals, I through X, right? But what you're going to do is the first time you're going to do it by multitasking. So you write A, 1, I. And then you go back, you write B, and so on until you've gotten all the way to X in the third column and you've written all 3 down. Time yourself while you do this. Then do it all again on a clean sheet of paper, but write them in sequence. 1 to 10 first, 0 to 9, and so on until you're finished. And you'll notice that you're probably about 40% faster because you were doing 3 tasks at once, which means you lost 40% of your time to context switching. It's super annoying to realize that we are not superhuman and that multitasking laws don't apply to us, but they do in fact apply to us no matter how special we think we are, and we're wasting a shit ton of time by multitasking. The problem is that multitasking has this really dark psychological trap, which is that multitasking makes us feel extremely productive. It feels so good to multitask. Because if you've got a list of 10 things, and you worked on all 10 things, you go, oh yeah, I did so much stuff today. I worked on this thing, and I worked on this thing, and I worked on this thing. But when you get to the end of the day, all 10 things that were on your to-do list are still going to be on your to-do list tomorrow, and tomorrow it'll probably be 11 or 12 things. In contrast, if you're single tasking, you're actually productive. If you start your list with 10 things and you focus on the most important thing until it's finished, you now have 9 things on your list. And if you're using the time boxing techniques and you're using the other strategies that we've talked about today, most likely you can get 1 or 2 or 3 things done off your list in a single day. And that means that instead of starting your day with 10 things and starting tomorrow with 12 things, you're starting today with 10 things, ending it with 7 or 8, and then tomorrow your list has actually shrunk. It hasn't grown. This is a really, really, really hard psychological thing to overcome because there's an endorphin hit when you multitask. The idea of getting lots of, like, motion feels good. We're visual creatures. We're rewarded by that kind of thing. So we want to do everything at once. So how do you know that any of this junk really works? Let's wrap up by actually just showing you my rescue time stats. So this is my year in 2016. You can see that I worked about 1,922 hours, round up to 23, and that means that I hit about 37 hours per week. And something important to note in this is that this includes my social media time, my Netflix time, all that stuff. I was probably actually working about 31 to 32 hours a week if we figure out the math there. This is 2017. In 2017, I was working a full-time job at IBM, so my hours went up a little bit. I ended up working about 39 hours a week. But during that time, and this is the thing that I think is really important, I've been able to manage my day job workload, so working as an IBM architect. I was managing my blogs and side projects, which my blog was managed-ish. It's a little abandoned. I've been able to keep up with multiple conference sessions and workshops. I've been able to keep a reasonably full social calendar. I actually see my friends now. I've been getting to the gym 3 times a week, except lately, but don't tell anybody. In 2017, I sure did. And I managed to get in 8 hours of average sleep every night. So that's a huge deal. Like this, the 70 to 90 hour week me probably would have gotten the first 3 things done, but the last 3 things would have gone to the wayside. And so to do a quick recap here, if we work too much, we're going to be worse at our jobs, we're going to be more likely to burn out, we're going to be less likely to feel satisfied at our job, we'll be less able to enjoy our lives. But if we work a reasonable schedule, we're going to be more creative, more productive, happier, and healthier. And so we can be more productive in less time by recapping these 5 steps. First, pay attention to how you spend your time. Set up a passive time tracker and use it. Time boxing tasks will help us create urgency and limit distractions. Find your rhythm, follow it, get things done. Front load those demanding tasks. Figure out what's the most important thing and do it first. Aggressively prioritize. Use that Highlander technique. Figure out what the biggest impact thing is going to be. And finally, please stop multitasking. You know what? You can skip the first 4 things. If you do one thing from this talk, do an experiment, never, ever, ever multitask again. If you're multitasking now, and you stop multitasking, and you don't notice that you get significantly more done, find me on Twitter. I swear I'll take you out to dinner. It's going to happen, right? You will 100% get more done. Because we all have a choice. So here's the thing. We have a choice as developers. We're going to be good at the development part, right? We're going to get cool things done. We're going to build things that we love. We're going to create projects that we're proud of. But we have a choice about whether we want to be this guy who was overworked, unhealthy, kind of miserable, didn't feel great about himself, or we can be this guy. This is me. For a couple years, I lived out of a suitcase. And this was in 2016. I was living in Airbnbs around the world with my partner. That's the lovely Marissa. And we were able to go do so many things and have so many adventures. And I was doing the same amount of work. Like, there's no difference in terms of productivity or success for the guy with the mustache or the guy in this photo here. There's just a difference in the amount of happiness that I experienced in living my life while I was enjoying that success. Or I guess in the first one, I was not enjoying the success. And in this life, I am enjoying that success. And that's what I got. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Jason. Looks like we have about 5 minutes. Should we have a couple
Sure,
questions?
yeah, if you got a couple questions, let's do it.
All right, the first one from Anonymous says, what would you tell somebody who tells you he is a workaholic and proud of it?
So the problem with a lot of this stuff is that if you have somebody who is just deeply absorbed in that culture, you can't, it's the lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink thing. And so you have to find a way to demonstrate the danger of it in ways that aren't saying you're bad and what you're doing is bad, but rather in ways that say like, hey, this time that you spent time with us, that was super healthy and it was really fun. Wouldn't you like to do that more? Demonstrate the things that they're missing out on rather than the things they're doing wrong, because it makes it easier for somebody to come around to that.
All right. And the next one from Chris refers to you talking about the flow state. Uncle Bob mentions flow state as a bad thing in his book, Clean Coder, because when you are in a flow, when you're in a flow, your code is fast, but you think less and it leads to messy design.
I mean, I just flat out disagree with that. I think I would, as somebody who has been doing code in a flow state for many years, like it has absolutely not impacted the quality of my code or the quality of my team's code. So I guess it would depend on, I'd need more details on what he means, because as it's stated, I think he's just wrong.
Okay, so agreed. All right. How do you block everything out, not multitask, if you work with people who interrupt you all the time? For example, if you're a manager.
So in some jobs, you just don't have that option. And if you're in one of those jobs where you've got huge demands on your time, but also huge demands on things you're supposed to deliver that require focused work, there are a couple strategies. There's a guy named Cal Newport who he structures his days by having 3 types of days. He has what he calls, I think, administrative days, where he is doing busy work. He's supporting people, he's getting his emails out of the way, he's cleaning up all of his administrative backlog. And then he has focus days where he doesn't go to the office and he just like lines people out with tasks. This is extremely difficult if the culture in the company is built around shoulder tapping. But it doesn't mean that it's not possible. So when I joined my team at IBM, we had a lot of shoulder tapping, and we had the idea that you would just interrupt people. So what we started doing was we instituted something where we would black out our calendars for 1 or 2 days a week, and then we would all go and work in different places. A coffee shop, we'd work from home. We would basically take ourselves out of the distracting environment. And what we found was that this actually helped improve the culture because people got better at asking questions. When somebody tries to shoulder tap you, a lot of times they're just working something out in their head. If you've heard of rubber ducking, they will come over to you and they'll talk through something, and then you don't even need to answer. They just go, thanks for listening, and they go back and they've solved the problem. So by removing yourself as somebody they can shoulder tap, they will start to write you an email, realize that they have the solution, and then they'll stop, they'll like close the email and go back and solve the problem. So it ends up being something that it requires cultural shift, and if your team isn't bought in, it's not gonna work, but you can do it.
That happens to me all the time. I totally agree. And the last one, I think we have time for one more. It seems pretty applicable. Oh, wait, no, wrong one. Here we go. Yeah, should I count volunteering, going to meetups, professional development, hobby projects as work hours, or things like this? We're at a conference right now. Would you count that as?
So this is where it gets messy, because I don't actually think that it's unhealthy to be doing code for more than 40 hours a week. I think where it gets unhealthy is when you're doing the same thing. And everybody's gonna have a different gauge of that. Like, one of my hobbies is building things, right? So I'm going to want to play in my off time with some new technology, or work on a hobby project, or contribute to an open source project, because that's my hobby. But I also take time to ride bikes, go on long walks with my partner, go eat out at new restaurants. So I think the trick is to find balance. And balance is not a strict, you're asleep for 8 hours, you work for 8 hours, you play for 8 hours, because that's insane to think that you could do, that's what a crazy person would do, is write out a list and say that I will allot exactly 8 hours of my day to the 3 key activities. So there's a balance in there that will make different amount of sense for people at different parts of their career. If you're very young and you're single and you're trying to build your career, it may make sense to work significantly more than 40 hours if you're spreading it across different things that'll help you learn and grow. But if you have a family and you're like sacrificing time with your family to go to the meetups or the conferences or whatever, and you feel bad about that, or your family feels bad about that, then that shows an imbalance. And so there's going to be a happy medium from everyone, and it's going to differ based on your current situation. So you're going to have to kind of find that line for yourself.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Let's give a nice round of applause for Jason.